why don't I just introduce everybody real quick? I've got a great panel for those of you that are out there watching right now. We have Peggy with us. Peggy is celebrating her 10th year as a senior executive in the PEO industry. Her responsibilities are on the operational side, but she has 30 years of human resource, and workers' compensation experience. Through the PEO, she's been able to be a resource and provide support for the unique needs of a variety of companies. And I think when I say the word variety, I think that's a really important thing because you kind of cover the gamut, and you've been a great resource, I know, for myself internally, and hopefully some folks out there can ask some questions to that. And Max is a commercial lines person, and he handles all the commercial line type stuff. Do you want to say anything, Max, or is that good enough for now? Or
yeah, I mean, just
Peggy's was a lot better.
I know
Peggy
insurance.
better. Yeah. Peggy has 30 years on you. So.
In other words, that means I'm just old, Max. I'm old.
Yeah. Down the road, we'll be able to get a little deeper into that. So I figured on this one, guys, this session is definitely more around safety and risk management, although we can circle back to, cover some of the same topics, right? And some of the things that kind of come to mind, I would say in Peggy's world and my world, from an HR payroll outsourcing role, are going to be things like, going into like being proactive in the workplace, what that looks like, what your responsibility as a business owner in 2021 would be, and what your moral responsibilities possibly are as well. The long lasting effects of, basically on how we work. And we're going to try to talk through a little bit of that. There's been a digital transformation. So technology is playing a key role in every aspect on how we're touching the employees. So we'll kind of get into a little bit of that. And I would think that in your world, Max, a couple of things I personally would like to touch on is, and I know you don't have all the answers because everything's so fluid right now, but I would love to get a little bit into like the workers' compensation side of it, and claims that people working at home, as an example, is that someone that can actually file a claim? Because if they're on the working hours and we're allowing them to work virtually at home, I mean, does that now make them, when they go to get a glass of water, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why don't we just open up right there with that? How about that?
Yeah, sounds good to me. First and foremost, the workers, and when you think about commercial insurance and insurance that, any business or organization or operation needs to buy, work comp has historically, in my opinion, will always be the most fluid, where there's the most transition and most number of variables and things changing, because it's based around people, which are constantly changing and evolving and learning and growing. So that's the Keith, what you just mentioned. I saw a couple more people just joined. Keith asked, so now that people are working from home within working hours, I'm in working hours right now. If I get up, go get a glass of water, and on my walk, take a tumble and a header into the floor, is that a work comp claim? That's something that, along with the business interruption that is going on, kind of going through the courts, going state by state, because work comp laws and regulations are made state by state. That's something that I think is going to definitely change as we move forward. For right now, I've been researching and working in the work comp space, not in the claims department per se, but there are people that are filing claims for, work comp related injuries or things like that from home. And it's kind of a slippery slope right now, and some uncharted waters on are these claims going to be paid? And that's something that, as we move forward, I think certainly will be, if people are working from home 100% of the time, and a workplace doesn't have the exposure of, going into an office also, historically, work comp claims are very seldom not to say they don't happen, but there's a lot of work comp claims and work comp activity in businesses, like a mortgage lending office. What kind of work comp claims are you going to have there, as opposed to, a steel fabrication plant? Because the exposure is just completely different. Sure, someone could trip and fall, and something could happen if someone's walking to the water tank from, their desk at a lending office or at a bank per se, as opposed to someone that's operating at a foundry. It's just, going in those jobs that are staying, on site, work comp is going to remain the same. But moving forward, it's a lot of the jobs where there hasn't traditionally been a lot of claim activity and, work comp activities. But, for myself, as an example, being an insurance agent or things like that. Those claims aren't happening too often. So it is something that certainly, courts in each state and insurance companies are going to have to look into and maintain as we go forward. But it's just an area where there's not a ton of activity, but we'll see how it plays out.
Max, it makes me wonder, right? And it kind of poses the question to me, at least, that, from an owner standpoint, that, safety manuals. I mean, in 2021, is that something now that you didn't think of prior that you have to now start thinking of adding into your safety manual on what the proper procedures is or what to do, working at home? It's interesting thought though, right?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. Especially with, because hypothetically, if you're going into the office and you have a rotating schedule of who can go in the office and when, if say we're in the same office, Keith, and you figure out that, hey, picked up my son from soccer practice, a kid on his team had coronavirus, didn't know until today. You go into the office, use the microwave, coffee machine, all that stuff. I go into the office and we're on the same rotating schedule for that week, if that's how it works out. And I get coronavirus. Is that a work comp claim? So I think, in some of those businesses where, it is still in person and there's a lot of, industrial exposure, there should already be safety manuals in place, I hope. But moving forward, I think in office settings, that's going to be huge is, hey, if you're going to go use a coffee machine, have Clorox wipes, right? There's going to be procedures, if you go to open the refrigerator, make sure you grab a Windex wipe or Clorox wipe it down afterwards. I think there's going to be things like that happen all the time because right now, myself included,
right,
say that me contracting coronavirus indirectly from being in the office for a couple hours a week is not a work comp claim. So that's something they're duking out right now. And I would definitely expect in the future there to be, safety and protocol manuals for, office settings like ourselves.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? You kind of made me think of a new question that I kind of would like to cover, but I had somewhere else I wanted to segue into. But, the interesting thing, Peggy, when I listen and have this conversation with Max is, you're working at home and we've seen some of this on TV now. What's in your backdrop, right? From an HR standpoint, I mean, what pictures, what, dress code or, there's some things in there that really start coming into play that forward thinking that could potentially put the the business owner at risk. And I just don't want to leave. We can touch on that, and maybe there'll be some questions to that. But the segue I wanted to go in, only because it's 20 minutes, is about work safety. And from an employer standpoint, as far as in our world, Max, which is more on the payroll and HR outsourcing side of it, is accommodations, right? Permitting telework, modifying work schedules like Peggy touched on before, permitting the use of paid or unpaid leave, in certain situations, and what that looks like. Protective gear made readily available. I mean, N95 masks, and like you were just kind of alluding to, hand sanitizers, checking temperatures. We're seeing that right now. You walking into any place that you go into, whether it be a sporting event or your kids, soccer game, not soccer, that's outside, but say basketball game inside, they're checking temperatures. So it's interesting to me, Peggy, from a safety standpoint, you have a moral obligation, you have a legal obligation, and both of those are kind of gray right now. I mean, what are some of your thoughts around, owners and them preparing their workplace, as people are coming back into it, to be safe, to be in a safe environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if I were to go backwards in order to come forward, when all of this started, I think the use of a virtual workplace was something that was done as a matter of necessity. At some point, we're going to transition from necessity to a way of life. So when people are doing things, they probably thought, cool, I'm at home, I'm protected, I don't have to worry about all this stuff. I love that I'm working from home. I get my laundry done at the same time, and then when it becomes a regular thing as we move forward, and plus I also am going to put one more thing in there. As all the protections under the FFCRA expire, and if they're not renewed, people are also saying to themselves, how am I protected now if I have COVID? I used to get paid from the government for that. So as we move forward, we have to think about that the mindset of people is going to change from something that was temporary in nature to something that will feel a little more permanent. So, I really suggest that clients or that people, business owners, think about, they've had an opportunity to kind of test ride what telework looks like for them. And they got to probably test those things that worked really well and the things that maybe were what I would call the gnats of that experience. I would suggest that if they don't already have it, business owners develop or work with a partner such as a PEO like us, who might be able to provide some telework agreements that include, things around data security, around, looking at their work environment to make sure that it is ergonomically correct, that there aren't any slip and fall hazards. Do they have the proper equipment? What are their working hours? Can they do their laundry while they work? All of those things should be in agreement, that you should be able to say to an employee, this isn't working and here's why, or this is working great and here's why. Same thing, Max talks about work comp stuff. And as I mentioned, with the expiring FCRA and people not having that pay protection when they get COVID, before probably the discussion around is it work comp or not was probably less relevant, because really what do people want? They want to make sure they're paid. So if that doesn't come back into play, I believe that that's going to open up conversations with employees that starts asking the question, is this work comp? I got that when I was at work. I know I did my contact tracing. I know where that came from. And had I not been at work, I wouldn't have had that. So I think that conversation is going to be one that will become more relevant as we move forward.
Yeah, and it actually opens up another question too. I mean, safely coming back to work and not endangering yourself or colleagues in terms of potential threats, like from the virus, the interaction with colleagues and meeting people face to face. So here I am coming back into the workplace, right? Or I've been in the workplace. I have, I now have, customers or even vendors that are coming in there. What is that protocol? Is it, are we putting down those I forgot what the word would be for them, that separates by 6 feet? I mean, what should they be doing? What should owners be doing right now as that interaction happens to keep people safe from each other?
Well, if you're asking me, I think anything we're doing for our employees, we should hold anyone coming into our building to no less standard than that.
Right.
If you have something in place that says someone is walking in your building to deliver a package and they're going to cross the threshold of your door, asking them the same questions about their health, if you will, their signs and symptoms, is in my opinion a non-negotiable. They shouldn't be allowed in the door to expose to anybody. So
Right.
as an FYI, we do have a question out here that says, how do you manage uncontrolled environment with employees working from home related to workers' compensation? Back to what I said a minute ago about kind of the whole agreement around that. And I think what's important to know is working from home in some regard is it is an accommodation. And just because we're in COVID doesn't mean that we have to turn our back to the safety of our employees. That's a very real expense for you if someone is injured in the workplace. So whether or not you can say prior to allowing the telecommuting situation to happen, or if it's already in place because of COVID, to do a check-in and say, you know what, before we get into 2021, we're going to put into place an agreement. We're going to take a look at your work environment. There's no reason you cannot do a Zoom call with somebody to say, let's do a tour of where you're working. We need to make sure that when you're working
Checks out.
for us, that you're in something that's going to be safe. And, you know, put some rules around distractions and things like that, that help to protect you in any way, shape, or form. And if you have something that just an environment that is not safe, then ultimately you might have to say, we're going to have to consider another alternative for you to work, you know, if it's possible. So.
Right. So Max, just because we do every 20 minutes, we have about 4 minutes right now. Is there anything on the commercial side as we go into 2021? I know we touched on the previous, call that we had about some different types of things. You know, you have the commercial property, and I'm not sure how the insurance industry is affected. I mean, like you said, you have the property side, you have the general liability, you have the workers' comp. I mean, you have the auto. What are you seeing that's happening right now as far as from safety standpoint? Like as an example, I'll give you something more specific. You know, we have driving exposure, we have U-Hauls, we have whatnot, or two people in those U-Hauls. I mean, is that something that's okay, or it's not permitted, or do they have to be required to wear masks, or any thoughts on that?
I mean, as she was just kind of saying, it's really insurance company is not going to tell you, hey, if you have two people driving in a U-Haul or two people working, if that's where they're going all day, every day, the insurance company is not going to say, all right, they're required to wear a mask. But that kind of, not in my opinion, that falls on kind of the responsibility of the business owner to be kind of like, hey, if I have Max and Keith doing the transportation and operations for this storage facility that we have one location 10 miles away from another location, and they're interacting, that I think that's kind of it falls on the shoulders of the business owner, where they have to decide, okay, in order to maintain streamlined level of productivity and revenue generation, what are some things that we can do internally to make sure that a slip up or an outbreak doesn't happen within or under our roof, so we're compromised? So like I said, that falls on but I think it would just be common practice for any business where you have more than one person kind of interacting closely with another person to throw on a mask, or have that, make sure you're washing your hands, and just do those kind of no-brainer things that can protect you. If you're not doing them, could really compromise revenue growth, just your business as a whole.
Yeah, I think the challenge too, right? If we're just talking verticals right now, and the folks that are in the self-storage industry, it's not so much like, say, a technology-based company, right, that can send people home to do work. I mean, they do need to have people that are physically there,
Yeah.
So I guess one thing is, I guess from an owner standpoint, you really want to make sure you have those protocols in place, which, like Peggy would recommend, of course. And whether that protocol is, here is our safety protocol that you need to be following, the checklist, right? That gets, written up and put out there. Because if both those people get sick, now you lost two people that you had in there, and now they're going home, and that's going to fall into,
who's there to let a new tenant in, or who's
right.
there?
Then you have the Family First, Coronavirus Response Act, where they have a right to, work at home, and they have all these different rights. But how does that help you inside of that space, And which brings me to a question to Peggy. And Peggy, so here I am. I have my workforce needs to be there. Maybe I'm kind of a smaller operation. I have 3 people that are in there, and I'm required to have someone walking around on the outside doing whatever it is that they have to do, and 2 people inside my office, or at least one. And that person comes to me and says, hey, we got the new FCRA law, laws that are put in place right now. I have diabetes. I'm not feeling so good, or, I want to be accommodated. I want to be accommodated to go work at home. But when the accommodation doesn't fit the role that's being provided, that creates a pretty tricky, slippery slope there, no?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think so much of this is about fear and communication. So that person comes into you and says that scenario, and you say, let's talk about that. So, what would be the environment? I think ultimately that doesn't just apply to that person, but to everybody. What's the environment that we're going to offer our employees to ensure their safety in a pandemic?
Right.
So if it's a function of, if it's somebody walking around the building, then I think that person, we could probably make a case to say there's limited exposure for you. But I think we just look at the way we work within the building to see if we can work a little differently. I mean, if the social distancing things are in place, that's where we have to give our employees kind of some sense of security to say we're doing the right things. We're gonna walk around. My son was telling me the other day that they have somebody that walks around their building all day and is cleaning all day long. For most businesses, that is not feasible. But it is, likely that we could, make sure that we can show we have regular cleaning schedules. We're providing you PPE. We're going to make sure that how you do your work is sufficiently protected, and in social distance. We're going to require the masks. We're going to do the things that will keep us safe regardless of whether we have an accommodation or not. Ultimately, unless a doctor probably says they absolutely cannot work due to being compromised, immunocompromised, the focus should always be on how can we accommodate that within the workplace.
Okay, so and correct me if I say something that's wrong on this. So FMLA generally, rule of thumb, right? And a lot of the folks that are probably listening, may not be on there, but as far as having 50 employees or more, right? But with the FFCRA, it opened the door to, if you had less than 50 employees, that now you had as an employer a responsibility, something they were not used to.
Right.
So now somebody say is sick, forget it, it's not a doctor's note, it's not an accommodation, I'm actually ill. Now I don't want to lose my job or my position. So I mean, what is the legal obligation? The person goes home, right? So they're working it, but yet you need to either come in yourself or hire somebody else, to come in and fill that role. It just seems like a very tricky,
Yeah, it is a very tricky thing, but number one, we know we don't want the person there. And I think the beauty I was actually talking to a client the other day that was like, I'm so done with this. I'm not providing this anymore. And, on the sick leave side of the FFCRA, really, most companies have an obligation to provide that. But the beauty of the FFCRA is that employers are being reimbursed through the government for the monies being paid to people. So it's really a no risk situation. So if they had to pay that person and call in, even attempt to pay it, they're still not out anything. I mean, it's a no situation in order to provide your people a way to be at home and recover through the pandemic or through that particular incident.
Right. And so I just want to point out too, guys, because I know we do a lot of this talking, but it's like, how do we actually help people? What do we do? We're trying to just be super informative today and not salesy at all as far as on what our companies do. But this is something, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Peggy, when you're talking about the Family First, Coronavirus Response Act, it's extremely fluid. I mean, it's changing. Sometimes it changes either monthly or daily. But this is something that we can, she would help navigate, her and her team through, tell you, how it had to go about, how the person goes there, how you get compensated, what you're entitled to. And there's little tiny things in there too that even go past like being sick. I mean, childcare for someone, who has a kid who has a school that the school gets shut down. I mean, we're hearing it every day. Schools, well, we're going to shut down schools. We're going to keep them over. But, there's a legal right to that employee who's not even sick to be able to go home and fall in that. And that's something that you would be able to track and help and assist them and provide guidance with, correct?
Yeah.
Hey, Keith, we have a question from Diana Isaacs.
Sure.
It is my understanding that if you get a PPP loan, you cannot get credit for amounts paid through the FFCRA, correct?
Oh, I can answer that. Ooh.
Oh, Peggy, here you go.
Max, thanks, Max. So that's a yes and a no. You can't get credit for the same monies. So if you are claiming, if you are paying someone, it's not a function of the fact that you got a PPP loan. Most people in the United States have gotten PPP loans, but you cannot claim a credit for money submitted for a person through the PPP and claim it through the FFCRA. So if your PPP money's already been spent, or whatever the case is, you can pay someone through the FFCRA as long as you're not double dipping.
Yeah, and just to add a little to that, Diana, is that correct, Max?
Yeah, Diane.
Yeah, Diane. So just to add a little bit to that, Diane. So on the other side, right, and I saw a lot of people get caught in this on the EIDL loan, the disaster relief loan. Some folks got that grant right away, and originally no one knew how that was going to work, but it turns out that the EIDL loan gets subtracted from the PP money that you had there, and then it actually goes from a grant to actually a loan. So I don't know if you got caught on both sides of that. If you have a question, I could help you with that as well. But that would just turn into a loan at start a year later at 3% interest or something like that. Okay. Any more questions on that, Max, or no?
Nope.
Okay. So just to kind of segue a little bit into, I know we've spoken a lot about it, providing that safety parameter, there's that moral responsibility as far as, should I put masks inside the workplace? Should I be able to provide the hand sanitizers? How many stations should I have? And at what point is that, say, an obligation from a moral standpoint and a legal standpoint? And I'm going to say, though, Peggy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that as long as you're putting in measures that you can point to that say and show that you have made efforts as an employer that are reasonable, I think is the key word, then you would be protected from someone saying that, hey, this workplace and this environment that I'm in is unsafe, therefore I'm making a EEOC complaint or some type of a complaint in that fashion. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think we have an obligation to provide, and I'll say this unless, again, it's going to depend on the industry, but
okay,
obligation to come hauling in here with a bunch of hand sanitizer. But what I think our obligation is to provide employees a safe work environment. Whether that's, how are we keeping it clean? Are we requiring masks? Are we checking temperatures? Are we looking at if anybody's coming, doing any sort of checking around signs and symptoms before they come to work? Social distancing and making sure that you just don't, so many folks, I find in the many folks I talk to, they implement things. And then I think what this ongoing COVID situation should be teaching us is there is no time to turn your back on safety there or on PPE, on any of those things. So if you want to minimize your exposure, both from a health and safety standpoint and a risk standpoint, don't turn your back to doing what's right for providing your employees a safe work environment. You don't have to buy a whole bunch of fancy pants stuff. You just need to implement a policy and stick to it.
Yeah. Max, you want to add anything, or do you want me to move forward?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah,
Dave right now.
Yeah. So what kind of comes to mind right now? I think potentially like legal claims, and we've seen, so much going way back. Over the last 5 years, especially, like we spoke about before. You had the Me Too movements. You had the the BLM. There's a lot of things that are out there, and people have been pretty, apt as far as educating themselves and jumping into, filing EEOC complaints and things like that. So a statement that I would make to the, to whether you're a manager, whether you're an owner, in some way have somebody that you're responsible for that's inside the company, is that you stay consistent. I think that's the key thing. So regardless of who you're dealing with, whether they're, say, a protective class by age, by religion, by color, by sex, just to make sure that if you're doing something a certain way for one person, whether it's allowing them to work from home,
do it equally.
right? That exactly. So think about the accommodation that you make before you make it, because you will have to accommodate across the board. Yeah, I think that's really important. From that standpoint. So we have any questions or? Oh,
hey, Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Hey,
It's like magic. You just kind of jumped in. I didn't even invite you. I didn't invite you here. You're a party crasher.
We love it.
He was our question asker in the last session. Have you
Yeah.
have you been put in here for a purpose to ask questions when no one else is?
I'm just making sure you guys are staying on your toes. That's all.
Good.
No, I think it's been great. We covered a lot of stuff. This one's kind of just been, this one more specifically has been more around like just kind of, risk management inside the workplace, risk management from a commercial standpoint, as it pertains to, changing legislation, what we've dealt with. We had some great questions, which I expected, and that's kind of was the main point where we covered on the previous one, was around really the payroll protection. Getting, what did that mean to us? Like, when did it happen, and the changes and the CARES Act and all that other stuff. So we really did a great job, I think, in really getting detailed, especially in the previous call on that. And Max, it's kind of like I said before, right? Remember I said our first question, the first thing that we had was PPP. You know what I mean? How do we do this? What do we have going on with that? And then the second one was BI claims, business interruption,
Hot topics.
And those were the two hot topics. I mean, they still kind of are, because nobody knows and nobody doesn't like uncertainty.
Yeah, it's all up in the air. No one likes to not know the answer to things, but
yeah,
unfortunately, there's not really an answer to get at this moment in time.
Yeah. And just to recap, since we can, I think we covered as much safety stuff, right, as we can wash our hands with on this part, just to kind of recap, going back to that, at the end of the day, these things are fluid. You have the Supreme Court's probably going to be hearing eventually about BI claims. If BI claims, get approved, it could bankrupt the insurance agency. Our expectation, although we don't have a crystal ball to rub on, or, to give you the correct answer, is that,
not yet we don't.
Not yet, we don't. We're working on that. I think, Dave, do you have one over there? I heard you guys have one at SBOA, no?
No.
Is that basically, there'll be some kind of government intervention, because if it comes down to the insurance carrier being told to do something, it's going to just blow up, and the insurance industry is going to say, we can't pay for anything.
Yeah,
right.
They're going to bow out completely.
Yeah, so that's our expectation there. And as far as the payroll protection, money that's out there right now, we're helping our clients. I mean, we do all the work for our clients. We help them fill out the applications. We keep track of all their stuff because we manage the payroll for them. We help them prepare for the forgiveness. So, I mean, we do it from nuts and bolts. But I understand if you're out there and you're just using QuickBooks, or you don't have potentially, some type of third party that you're utilizing and outsourcing on your payroll side, or have an HR person on staff, or at least an HR consultant that you can go reference to, it can be pretty scary, and so these are things that are a little complicated, because that's what the government does, is they make things complicated, and they're confused on their good days, right, with plenty of time to prepare. And right now they've had no time to prepare, so they are super confused, and then they kind of throw it on us to say, hey, here's what you have to do, maybe, which is
right. But we haven't decided yet.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so you sure? Maybe.
On that note, I do have a question that comes to mind. Sure. With new owners, operators entering the space, and I only bring this up because a lot of the most recent conversations I've had with new members coming into the SBOA is, what is there any peace of mind that you can give these new people coming into the industry concerning stuff like this? Is there an opportunity for them to grow and expand and add staffing and stuff like that right away, or is this one of those times where they just kind of have to get in and wait, or do you sit on the sidelines and wait, or is there a peace of mind that comes when they attach their wagons to a company like Assured Partners or other agencies out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, especially if you're in some type, or you had some type of planned growth, in mind. I mean, I think right now, just for the reasons I just said before, do you really want to be dealing and guessing with the paperwork? Do you want to be coordinating multiple different type of vendors when you can run every single thing through one system? I mean, do you want to try to figure out, how to electronically utilize, technology tools that are out there, and then try to integrate them from 5 different sources into one platform? With Synchrony HR, what we're able to do is, especially if someone's in growth, and you should be thinking growth. I mean, especially in your industry, because I think on one of the sessions I sat in on, it's a pretty recession proof, industry, right? And it is not a high volume of employees, inside one particular space. But with that being said, you know what, you still are running into all these little different types of nuances, and you still need to go into, you see it with the keyless entries. Well, if you're utilizing your physical establishments in that way, then your people capital should be, looked at in the same way. And when we talk about things like I just mentioned, time and attendance, clocking ins, clocking outs, and applicant tracking from a new hire to bring them on board, the more you can do of that, A, is going to make you more efficient and more profitable, but B, is going to create less touch points that create contact for people to actually, come into contact and get the virus. And the last thing I'll say on that is, what's really important about that is something that Peggy and I were touching on earlier, is, it's not the type of industry, David, where, hey, you know what, go home and work on that. You know what I mean? Yeah, maybe you can get away with a little bit. You really need people that are there. So you want to keep those people healthy and on the work site, because we all know, and if anyone's on here listening to this, what a pain it is to really continue to hire people and find the right person, and and go through that process. And so to avoid that, just some simple precautions right down from the technology, and then having people like us to ask questions to make sure that you as an owner, are protected. So I did want to add one more thing, actually. So if you're talking about a growth company, like you were just saying, and I say as a real life have, one facility, or say I'm in an acquisition process where I'm going to have multiple, acquisitional properties, to put plans in place like that, that's going to take some thought to onboard those different locations. If I have different states, different state liabilities come in there, I have some different state, exposures. These are things that we handle at 100%. It is completely a turnkey solution, regardless of states, regardless of the employees that you're bringing in, regardless of protective classes, regardless of legislation change. I mean, we are one-stop, shop for everything on that. So I think that for our company, we support fully any growth inside your industry.
Yeah, and I'll say the same from.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Peggy.
You and me, rock, paper, scissors. I was going to say one thing from our perspective. New business owners, old business owners, it doesn't matter which. The reality is, you didn't get in business to do the things that we do. And that's the thing. That's why a lot of the feedback that I just got an email about 10 minutes ago that said, oh my gosh, I just went through benefits onboarding for the first time. Our company just used electronic benefits enrollment. Not us, that client. They're like, where have you been all my life? That's stuff that you don't get in business to do what we're doing. Your job is to focus on how to make your business as successful as possible, how to find the right tools of the trade, how to make sure that you have contingencies plans in place for whatever's coming your way, to make sure you're servicing your customers to the best of your ability. And what really our intention, our mission is to give that small business owner the big company tools to be able to attract and retain, and to be able to just get through things more quickly. You don't need to be collecting 17 pieces of paper for a new hire. You can send them a little love note, and they get it all done, and they show up with their IDs, and you're done with it. I mean, that's why we're here, to make that part of your life less complicated.
Max, you had a thought?
I wore him out. He can't even remember it.
I'm trying to think.
Well, I'll talk then while you think about that.
Oh, darn.
Dave, here's another thing I think is, it's really cool. It's really, I think, a really cool, neat thing. So I'm in the storage space, right? That's our vertical. Some companies offer employee benefits, some don't, right? So let's say you do not want to, or let's say you're not currently offering medical, or if you do want to, I mean, we can, put that all together for you. We can manage that. We can onboard everybody, through our platform. We can answer questions. We can reconcile bills. We can do, literally, we pay the bill for you. We do everything except, write the check. Well, actually, we can even write the check, actually, right? But there is something that we do have that's actually pretty neat, that doesn't cost the employer anything, but yet can provide some type of benefit to the employees. And that is a supplemental master plan. So things like dental, vision, life, disability, short-term and long-term. We provide all that on our chassis, at a group rate, because we have multiple companies, right, on an aggregate. Think of it like a pooling, almost like an association type plan. And we're able to bring people on with, guarantee issue, very limited underwriting, and manage that whole process at a group rate. So that automatically goes out there. The second thing that everyone gets that's a full-time employee, if they with Synchrony HR, is telemedicine, which is huge right now going into 2021. And there's no copay on it. So maybe if I can't do the major medical right now, I can give someone telemedicine with no copays. They can get prescriptions written. They can call up a doctor anytime about, what I'm feeling and get that satisfied. They can get dental, they can get vision. And then as a second thing, we've also provide a 401k at no charge, no audits. There's no, 5,500 filings. There's no fiduciary responsibility. Very cool thing to make your company look good, especially if you're hiring, putting it out there, or retaining, really good people. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Max, you get your thought back?
Yeah, I mean, Dave was kind of asking, from our expertise, what kind of things can we kind of, as companies are looking to grow and I guess grow/maintain their livelihood and lifestyle, what kind of things can we do to help make that a little bit easier? And I'll say, I mean, from an insured partners perspective, being one of the largest insurance brokerages in the nation, we have access to a myriad of markets, your average small town brokerage might not have access to, and with that knowledge of brokers across the country, across the nation, globally, actually, we're able to, speak amongst ourselves and see what trends are going on, see where there are pain points for current clients and people that we work with, to see, what are some underlying issues that people have that we can mitigate for a group as a whole, and kind of apply that to as we bring on new clients. So that's something, I mean, I guess it's kind of goes along with the lines of kind of law of large numbers. The more clients you kind of have and can see what trends are going on, and new discoveries are being made, especially as we learn and go through this coronavirus era, can only help you kind of maintain that growth lifestyle and growth objectives that might, kind of get halted or scared away a little bit in the face of this coronavirus deal.
All right.
Yeah. Any other questions, Dave?
Yeah. So how would you say, how can we promote safety and security at our self-storage facilities now with this coronavirus stuff that's going on?
I mean, as I said, circling back a little bit, I won't dive too deep in because we've talked about it, but, making sure that people are washing their hands, cleaning down surfaces, wearing masks, that kind of stuff. I would also say, from a property and liability insurance standpoint, making sure that you have the necessary kind of factors and things to kind of ensure that your property is protected. This can be done through, hundreds of ways, but making sure that you've got a fence around the whole facility. You have road bumps through, the areas where people can drive, to eliminate people driving fast and causing an accident that way. Fenced in gates, so, not any Joe Schmo can just walk in that may not have a unit and decide, oh, I'll go peek around. Or making sure you have video cameras that are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, ensuring, your tenant's property is safe. Maybe installing a keypad on the gate, or getting a touchless key for tenants so they can come and go as they please. And even, with this coronavirus deal going on, making sure that if you need to install this stuff, you make it contactless. So there's no fear of, okay, if I go and type my, little code on the pad, am I going to be touching something else that someone exposed or that has corona may have had? I mean, there's a number of things you can do. Just make sure that ultimately, as a storage owner, you want to make sure that your tenant's property is safe and secure, and that I can't be walking down the street and decide, oh, I want to go take a peek inside and see what I can grab. So I think there's a number of ways, like I said, making sure you have safety precautions like fences, speed bumps, roadblocks, gates, cameras. All that stuff goes a really long way. And I know I have clients right now that helps not only, give a peace of mind to a tenant that's looking for somewhere to store my stuff, but also that stuff also drives down cost of insurance premiums, because all that stuff is going to drive away, causes of loss.
Yeah, and in our world, David, and I'm going to put this question to Peggy, in our world, Peggy kind of touched on this before, and it comes down to, the employment liability issues that you could run into, and also the fact of just keeping people safe in general so that they can, find their way back into work. And so in our world, is putting together, a proper employee handbook with guidelines and, best practices. And Peggy, I'll put that on you because you know more than I do about that.
Yeah, I would agree. The more you can do to define both company practice expectations, safety measures, what you expect, kind of inspect what you expect. I think that not assuming that people know what's expected is important, and that's both from a safety standpoint and from just normal HR practice standpoint, making sure that it's clear for people. One of the things too that when I was just doing some reading and talking about the difference in the times, and especially in your industry where you don't have a lot of people on property all the time, the question is, how can you utilize any sort of safety communication? How can you implement that kind of thing in a, if you will, a teleworking world, or in a world where people aren't together? And, I think thinking differently about that, just because people aren't sitting in the same space doesn't mean that it can't happen. And I think, utilizing a Zoom call or doing something, and even if you're getting, joining something where you can do these little safety snippets as an industry, or getting a couple of storage units together to say, let's try and present topics that are relevant to our people on security and safety, and whatever the case is, it all should happen. I think the learning has to be continuous for your folks, so that they can remain safe in their job.
Great.
Yeah, and that's what this is all about, Dave. Just us being able, and it's the same way we work as a company. It's just, sharing our, our knowledge and our experience, and kind of like what Peggy had kind of jumped into about what you got into business for. I mean, you're in business, right? And especially if you're starting with just one location, and it's the business of doing what you're going to run that business. It's not the business of paperwork. It's not the business of how to complete I-9
dealing with
properly.
an insurance company. Let us do that.
Right, exactly. I mean, on all that stuff, I mean, you wouldn't go to, one of the carriers to go ask them for a policy on your, on your general liability and say, go directly there and do it. No, you go to a consultant to sit there, and then you get a consultant like Max who has that. And I've done a ton of work. I mean, we're integrated, as you know, with AP. So we've done a ton of work with them, and it's more than just writing a policy. It's a group of people, from all different areas, kind of like ourselves, that touch in all these different areas. Max is not a one horse pony. Max has, 100 people behind him that have answers to questions that, he may run into, or they're going to sit there and talk through a certain strategy after they review, say, the declaration pages and all the other stuff.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach.
Right. And then you're going to customize that, and, right down to, safety programs where you have, folks come on site if the company's large enough and really requires that and wants someone to walk around. And kind of to your point, I mean, this speed bump, speed bump here, speed bump there. And there is not a cost to that. We got to be long-term thinking. We can't be short-term thinking today, right? And I think if anything that we've learned in the last year, we have to be forward thinkers. And forward thinking is not what it's going to cost me to put a speed bump up. It's not what it's going to cost me to, say, put a gate around my facility. It's going to be forward thinking that 12 months from now, my premiums are going to decrease. That are going to pay me back tenfold, over time for putting in those things. And from our standpoint and what we provide, it's about, the same exact thing, being forward thinking. When you start your business and you have 4 or 5 people, a lot of times it's people. I mean, you started probably with either your children or your buddy or a friend, and these companies that are doing acquisitions, especially if you're acquiring other companies, there's no loyalty there. They don't know you. I'm not going to say about everybody, but I mean, there are people now, as you start getting further away, that they're I think to Peggy's point, they just want to get paid, and that's where we're here to protect that side of it. We're here to lock that door that's on the opposite side. We're here to provide, that protection by telling you the things that you don't know, right? And then answering the questions that you have. and then putting safeguards into place for you, or at least suggesting that we don't force anyone to do that, from best practices that are there to protect the owners and also protect the employees, right, for a better environment. And then share kind of the knowledge and stuff that we have from all the different companies that we've worked with on how they've actually made a best workplace type of feeling, so that people are happy when they go in there and they work, and then therefore they're more productive, and they're not looking to do to get hit with an EEOC complaint or something like that. And I'm going to say this out loud, Max, and we haven't touched on this one at all. If you are right now do not have an EPLI policy, in place for your company, you are literally walking on a rainy road with dark clothes at night, because you know what, maybe you won't get hit, but with the claims that are going out there, that's out of your own pocket. That's can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Something as simple as you not even being there. And this is what I mean by getting to different locations. Someone says, "Hey, Susie," or "Hey, Dave," right? "You look good today." Dave's uncomfortable. Dave says, "Hey, we need to do something about this. Nothing's done." That can fall on you. You can say, "Hey, I didn't do that." Well, no, that's on you.
It happened under your roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the note of forward thinking and being prepared, let's say I have a tenant that hasn't paid, and I need to clear that unit out, and I need to make it available for a paying customer. What are some steps or recommendations that you guys have to protecting me as the owner making the decision like that?
Well, that from an insurance standpoint, that's easy. That's called a sale and disposal liability policy, which I'm sure a lot of people, if you're listening, are familiar with. But essentially, this is, say at Max's storage facility, it's been the fictional place we've been using, Dave. Let's say Peggy decides to not pay 2 months of her
and that's
monthly due.
Yeah, that's very likely.
They see you on Storage Wars.
But so that is, and when I start my business, Max's mini storage, I'm going to draw up a contract that says, "Hey," and have Peggy sign it. "Hey, it's important to have that contract in place to protect yourself in this kind of scenario, in addition to a sale and disposal liability policy. But hey, if you don't pay for X period of months, we have the authorization to dispose of your property and open it up for, someone that does want to pay," which is, makes sense, because if a unit is occupied by Peggy's stuff that is not being paid for, and I have Keith who wants to come in and store a bunch of stuff and pay for it, as a responsible business owner and someone dedicated to growing my business, I have to do that. So first and foremost, I'd get a business kind of contract in place that you have a tenant sign that says, "Hey, if you forego paying your monthly dues, we have the authority to go and take your stuff out and open it up to someone new." And then secondly, a sale and disposal liability policy. So that essentially holds the owner not liable in case the tenant breaches contracts. Like I said, it's important to have that contract in case. But just overall, it's just important to protect yourself, as opposed to, kind of saying, "Oh, this isn't going to happen to me," because on the chance that it does, you may not have kind of a protection contract in place or a sale and disposal liability policy. It's going to be a pain if you don't have that in place. And I take Keith's or Peggy's stuff out because she hasn't paid me, and then she comes back and sues me because she says, "Well, I never signed a contract that said you had the authority to do this if I didn't pay," and I'm going to get taken for some money if that's the case, and I don't have a sale and disposal liability policy. So it's just all about protecting yourself, and those are definitely two of the strongest ways that I would do that for that kind of scenario where I do have a tenant that has decided to not pay. Keith, it looked like you had something you wanted to say. I'm sorry. Or was
no, I thought I was frozen again, so I was moving around like last time. I'm getting stir crazy right now.
Really quick, are these policies that will hold up even during a time like right now with a pandemic? Let's say Peggy lost her job, unplanned, and she would like to pay, but she can't pay. Is this something that's going to still protect me or you as the owner operator for, essentially removing her items?
Well, I'd be willing to bet as of right now, yes. But as we move forward, and again, this is all up in the air, just kind of it's fluid, because people, hadn't really thought about getting furloughed or losing jobs in mass numbers before this year. So that's something that I think in the future could kind of be built in to kind of protect someone like Peggy. So hypothetically loses her job, can't pay for it. But again, it's just to say right now, I think Peggy or we would be protected, yes, in the case that she can't make the payment due to losing a job. But I think that's something we definitely, myself as an insurance agent is going to have to stay on top of moving forward and kind of watch for things like that. As we all know, the insurance landscape and HR outsourcing landscape is all continuously changing, and there's going to be a lot of things, I think, especially as we move into 2021, that are going to be different than we anticipated a year ago. So definitely something to look out for as of now. Yes, I think we would be protected, but moving forward, we'll see.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, David. Because you have that right now with and I don't know how one applies to the other one, but you have it right now with to your point, people losing their jobs, but yet they legally can't be removed from their home. I don't know if that would constitute the same thing or not, but it is interesting to how that's all going to kind of fall into place, in 2021.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I see that's pretty common and popular. But it sounds like those are two things that you want on your policy. Regardless, you'd rather have it and not need it than need to not have it.
Yeah, and they're not terribly expensive things. I mean, to get a contract drawn up for a tenant to sign when they say, "All right, I'm paying for 6 months, sign it," easy, and to get sale and disposable liability policies are very affordable as well. So, like you said,
yeah,
better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to throw in there to everyone that's out there listening as I see the session starting to wind down. You know what? Listen, reach out to us. It's not easy. Not hard to reach out, through Dave, ourselves, our contact information's there. Again, you know what? We can be your complete back office from a human resource standpoint, payroll standpoint, employee benefits standpoint, whatever strategy that is, like I spoke about earlier, workers' compensation standpoint. We collaborate with Max. We all work together very closely. So any of the things that Max was just referencing, in your industry or space that are important, or maybe even some things you're not thinking of from the insurance side, from a commercial line side, we'll sit down, we'll do a complete diagnostic through conversation, and we'll either be able to validate the current situation that you have as being A-okay, or say, hey, you know what, here's a different option. Maybe you should take a look at it. It's really that simple. So I hope that you guys, reach out to us and utilize that. It's a free consultation.
Absolutely.